Welcome back to Rolando Estacado. My name is Rolando, and for today's episode, I'm going to be looking at something very specific, and I'll be sharing this with you today. I'm going to be sharing the double Bowie knife methodology that is not necessarily historically accurate. I imagine that at some point, some Bowie practitioners in the 1800s, at some point, were playing around with a couple of Bowie knives as part of their personal practice and maybe even their personal use. We don't have a lot of historical references to this or any historical evidence that they were used, whether it was for utilitarian reasons or for personal defense reasons. That said, when I spoke to Bill Bagwell and had him make me a righty-lefty Bowie knife, the reason why I asked him for this is because I wanted to understand more deeply what double weapons work would look like with the Bowie knife. Knowing what the specific mechanics and techniques were that were being required of using a Bowie knife, I thought it would be an interesting exploration for my own practice when I was working with two Bowie knives. So when I first got these Bowie knives from Bill, this was back in 2005. And my approach in developing my own, I would say, my own organized thoughts and my own organized system in terms of using double Bowie was really a lot of trial and error in terms of what felt comfortable to me. There was some sparring involved for sure, but sparring can also be gamed because athleticism does come into play with it. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is how these two specifically would work in terms of moving with these two Bowie knives. Something else to consider when we are talking about double Bowie knives, this is very specific to these two knives that Bill had built for me. This is a righty. This is a dedicated righty Bowie knife, this one. And what he had done was that he had asked me to sketch out a drawing of my hand, both right and left, so that he knew what the exact grip mechanics and the right weight distribution for the Bowie was for the right. And in his words, he said the idea was that, for some crazy catastrophic reason, lights go out and you got to go grab your Bowie knife. You have to know which one is the righty and the left just by touch. So what he had done was just by feel, I know exactly when I pick up the righty, it feels like the righty. And then the same thing for the lefty. So they both feel exactly where they're supposed to be. The lefty belongs to the lefty and the righty belongs to my right hand. Whenever I try to practice by switching them up, the entire weight distribution just doesn't feel right. It feels really weird. This one, it feels like it's just going to fall over on its own, and this one doesn't want to move at all. That's just how it works. But when they are switched in the right configuration, this one just wants to fall forward and this one wants to back cut. And when I had the conversation with Bill at the time, his idea was that this knife, in particular, the right one, was going to be more like the shock troops. That's the one that occupies center line. And this is the one that as you occupy center line, this is the one that comes around. So it's kind of similar to what boxers like to do. My favorite example of this is Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, Thrilla in Manila, and I believe that was round 3 of Thrilla in Manila, where the jab, he used the jab to kind of keep it in Joe Frazier's face, and then as he was occupied with that and trying to swat that one away, the cross would just come in with super sniper precision and just fall straight into his left eye. And as we all know, I think it was round 14 where that left eye was completely shut. So the idea that Bill had when he shared this with me was that this was going to work like a jab, but a very heavy jab. And then the lefty was going to come and snipe in from out of range of vision and go ahead and do its work. Now, whether that was a back cut or come in from under as a thrust, that was his idea behind it. And so what I've done in the last 19, 20 years or so is work with that idea that this work as lead and the lefty work as this multi-angular, multi-purpose knife. And what this did for me in terms of this mindset is that, and you'll see it in the video as well when I demonstrate it, is that it takes us away from the most common idea when we think of double weapons, which is from Filipino martial arts, Sinawali. Filipino martial arts, Sinawali in particular, is the most famous and most accessible as far as the use of double weapons is concerned. It is the easiest to learn, and all of a sudden, you know how to do 4 counts, you know how to do 6 count, you know how to do payong, half beat 6 count, and all of it is with sticks. But you're going to see why that system has its limits when you're using double Bowie knives. So I stretched the limits of my understanding of Sinawali when it came to Bowie knives. So I came to my own conclusions through my own practice, not only in terms of solo training, but also in sparring into how to use double Bowie for my own personal development, my own understanding. And my hope is that this is something that can be useful for you in your own practice. And also something to think about is that two is always better than one. Why not have just one Bowie? Have two. So I hope you enjoy. Stick around, stay tuned, and thank you for joining.
These two Bagwell buoys were made custom for me by Bill himself, and I'll tell you, when I first got them in 2005, I really wasn't sure what to expect. But I was very surprised and very delighted to see that he had really customized it for my right hand and for my left hand. And what you'll notice here is that on the right is slightly broader, but they're of the same length. And the one on the left is slightly narrower because as far as his combative system is concerned, he wanted them to be a little different from each other. One a little more shock troop with the right one, a little lighter on the other one, which kind of snipes from a different angle. So what I'm demonstrating here is the Filipino Sinawali 4 count where it is edge forward, shoulders are square, and this is relatively easy to access. What the Bowie knife can actually allow us to do is to decouple the shoulder right and left, meaning it can extend forward so it can allow for thrusts. So when we are working with the Bowie knife, we are also now looking at the right hand being forward, the right blade being forward, which occupies center line from all types of levels and angles. However, with the left, when it decouples forward, it can thrust, but it can also decouple and back cut from the left. So that is the paradigm that we're going to be working off of. But first, let's take a look at the Sinawali from Filipino martial arts, which is edge forward, shoulder square. Notice that it doesn't really get to my target on the side. So my target on the side wearing the jiu-jitsu gi, I can't really reach him. It's not until I back cut and take advantage of that false edge that all of a sudden the Bowie can actually start to reach. And when I start to decouple my shoulder, where one shoulder goes forward versus the other, I can now start to take advantage of the real features of the Bowie knife, which it has a thrust, it has a false edge that can back cut, and a tip that can actually thrust forward. So what that means is that moving with the Bowie is going to be a kind of moving away from classical Filipino martial arts conventions with double stick and really taking advantage of the edge, false edge, and the tip. So in many ways, although it is shorter than traditional Filipino sticks, because of the shoulder decoupling, it actually works as a longer weapon. So what you're seeing here is the 4-count Sinawali, but now when I start to add back cuts and thrusts and snap cuts, now I am changing ranges and changing angles. For example, there's the right back cut, a reverso with the left, another back cut with the right, which turns into a snap cut, a back cut at the top. But notice that my shoulder is constantly turning and rotating, which then ends up changing the distance at each time. So there's my back cut, watch the flow, and then all of a sudden the left comes in and changes the angle altogether. So when you're working with the Bowie knife, as a practitioner, be very mindful that these added features, the tip, the false edge, and the edge itself, allows you to move very differently than if you're working double stick, even though the stick is a longer weapon. Note that when I am moving With the Bowie knife, I can do these multiple back cuts and changes the range. But note, when I really extend forward and really take that shoulder all the way forward, I can do combinations, devastating combinations, with a right back cut, which goes to the top of the head. And then all of a sudden, that thrust goes even past the target. So this is what makes working with double Bowie knives really illuminating, because we can start to really reveal what the body is capable of when working with double knives and double buoys. So when you're working with two sticks, you're not necessarily taking advantage of its full length because it's an impact weapon and you're hitting with the shaft. But if you're working with shorter double buoys, all of a sudden you have a whole new way of moving with the body. I hope you enjoyed this video.